Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back at it again to break down some more advanced tips for Sylvie, as well as some more information now that I've pugged fully from Contender rank all the way up to Eternal. I did not have any set group. I did not run with the same team the entire time or anything like that. I was often grabbing people from chat or just posting in the Fellowship Discord all the way up to the top. And I can tell you, it can be pretty brutal. And so I definitely have learned a lot about the build that I suggested to you guys in our basic guide, some more information on how to play it properly, what I've learned throughout the pugging process, all that great stuff. So, quick recap, I'm running the Verdant Restoration build, where you focus on a lot of healing for your Restore Life. You are still running Flower Power for the double charge of Heartbloom. I was playing with Natural Protector for most of it. I even tried a couple other options like the additional healing when players are like low HP, but I definitely prefer the Natural Protector overall. And then I was running lots of damage reduction tools like self-damage reduction, Magic Ward, Spirited Fortitude, Bluey's Gambit, all that kind of stuff, Natural Knowledge for mana regen, all the way through. And I really like this build a lot, and the big reason I do is because it helps your Restore Life healing so much. And that's really vital when you need to do a crazy amount of prio healing, spot healing, and sort of emergency healing. When you're pugging a lot, you don't really have a good idea as to when somebody is going to take damage, and having immediate output on demand helps a ton. So what I was doing in essence with this build was I was maintaining 2 Flutterfly heals onto various allies, whether it was the tank, a DPS I thought was going to die, like a Taric all the time, or onto myself. Then the other 2, I was basically holding. And as a result, I was using those banked up Flutterflies as my Restore Life heals. In order to make sure I'm not pulling any of the other heals though, I need to break up a GCD so that I have something being cast in between my Restore Lives. Whether I'm casting a Prickly Vine or I'm using my weapon ability or something like that, whenever incoming damage is coming out, in essence, I'm casting Restore Life, following it up with an instant GCD, casting another Restore Life to deal with the biggest amount of damage. I had some moments where I was spamming Restore Life like crazy and it worked okay, but it definitely feels like a lot more efficient to alternate between that free GCD if you can, which helps if you have some of the weapon abilities with like short cooldowns, so you can kind of weave those between, like the Sky Bolts for spot healing. That's what the one I ran quite a bit. You can see it on the far right side of my middle action bar in the middle of my screen. I would weave between that quite a lot as well. When it came to trinkets, I got this Chalice, which is your mana pot, and I basically kept that as long as I possibly could, no matter what. The mana pot helps out an enormous amount, and while it's not mandatory, it just gives you so much safety and breathing room. Your out of combat mana regen is incredibly high in Fellowship, but in combat, especially when you keep on taking highest eye level gear, so you can't always get the haste that you want, it makes it way better to have the mana pot. So if you get the Chalice, I'd highly recommend you hold on to it as much as you possibly can. Get working on using it on cooldown. If I had my choice of trinkets, I would hold on to the Battle Res trinket as long as I could. I never ended up getting it, and I still have not re-rolled into one of the Battle Res trinkets yet. So I've been running the Sin Binding Stone, which is like damage reduction for your team. That one, always a really easy win as well. If I was running a dungeon like Silken Hollow with those poison dispels that'll like one-shot you if you fail to dispel them, I would definitely run the Mass Dispel trinket. There's some other good uses, especially in Carnage dungeons. That's one of the affixes as you get higher. That's always really helpful. I think having like damage reduction, mana pot, battle res are probably some of the biggest ones for a healer to have as much as you possibly can. One question I got a lot was on how to properly use Bluey. That's your blue Flutterfly. So while it's on you, your mana costs are reduced by 20%, and whichever target has Bluey also increases your healing by 100% on that target with your Flutterfly healing. So a lot of times what I do is whenever I'm pugging, the very first run and the very first pull of the dungeon, I put Bluey on the tank, put a Flutterfly heal on the tank, put a Flutter Call Restore Life hot on the tank as a run starts. I just put all that stuff on the tank, and then I'll usually make sure I'm just mashing healing into them at the very beginning just to see what happens. A lot of times with my experiences with Makos is they'll take some pretty heavy damage as they walk into a pull, and then they kind of stabilize, get their mitigation rolling. They even have a clone they can put down that'll tank for them for a brief period as well. A lot of times when I see those, I hold off on using any sort of defensives. Now, Helena is about to get buffed at the time of this video. It hasn't happened yet, so most of my runs were with Makos, and what I really noticed with them was how much they can really put out a ton of self-healing. but they also have really high mobility, and so when you start seeing them kite all over the place, that's a great time to make sure you're putting the Iron Bark on them, depending on if they're kind of just like walking away a little bit, not fully running. It's usually a good time to put your Iron Leaf onto them, give them a little bit of extra mitigation. If you know that they have to like really set up a huge amount of mobs for a pull, that's where putting your Safe Haven down onto them can also help a ton. Now, putting Bluey on the tank is really helpful. It's good. I've almost never am putting it on a DPS player. So when I'm using Bluey on the tank, it's usually setting up early pulls when the tank is taking a lot of damage. But anytime I need to AoE heal, I'm always pulling my Bluey back onto myself. And the reason is that the 20% mana cost reduction doesn't just go for Restore Life, which can be, moderately expensive when you don't have Bluey on yourself, but abilities like Heart Bloom are very, very expensive when you do not have Bluey on yourself. And those are the abilities that really effectively make you go very quickly. Like using your Heart Bloom, Life Petal, Restore Life, spam is just ooming you like crazy when you don't have your Bluey on yourself. So a lot of times if I flip the Bluey off from my tank, back onto myself, then I'll usually try to find a time for like Iron Leaf onto the tank, or have my Safe Haven down on the party so that everyone's getting more healing, something like that to sort of compensate for the tank. You also have the ability Enfeeble, which does work on bosses, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But whenever there's an empowered mob or just a big prio mob, I'm always kind of looking at what's the deadliest mob in the pack. How can I enfeeble them when I know the tank doesn't have as much mitigation up? And usually with Mako, when they have their best tools up, their health bar just doesn't move at all. And then when they have like mid levels of mitigation, you can start seeing, their health bar sort of flutter around just a little bit. Now, some questions I got about like, why not put out all 4 your Flutterflies at all times? And that's really because your GCDs are very precious to you when you're playing a Sylvie. You have so many different things that you want to like maintain and work through, especially if you have like the Twilight Skybolt weapon. I think it's called like the Cash weapon, where you have a short cooldown with a bolt that does healing or damage depending on who you target it with. Your GCDs are really at a premium. You could Nettle Bolt for mana, you could use your weapon ability for damage or for healing, and of course, you have your Prickly Vines, Boom Shrooms, all of that great stuff to juggle between. And so what I try to make sure I do is hold on to those 2 Flutterflies so I can freely restore life, so that way I'm not having to spend 2 extra GCDs to apply those Flutterfly heals off onto targets, and then when they get called back, they call back the oldest targets. So, for example, if I kept the heals on the tank, and let's say a Tarek was like a bad DPS who I know takes damage, well then the other 2 would theoretically go on me and the other DPS. And then if I restored life, it would pull it off the 2 primary people I'd want to heal, the tank and the Tarek, and then I'd have to reapply it to those people every time I restore life, and it just gets inefficient. Now, if you're running like a sync fluttering, Flutter Swift type of builds, you can just spew it all out there. I haven't been running that. I didn't find it as helpful, especially when I'm pugging and I need to do all this crazy spot healing to people on a dime. Maybe I'll play with that build a little bit later as I get into some more internal runs. We'll see. But the thought process I had was just put your 2 Flutterfly heals on people who take a lot of damage, bank your 2 other Flutterflies onto yourself so you can restore life as you need to. As a result, you can then weave your abilities in between your restore lives. So you could restore life, Prickly Vine, restore life, Heart Bloom, restore life, Boom Shroom, restore life again, something along those lines. So you always have a GCD in between, so you're not calling back the 2 active Flutterflies to allow you to go back to back on restore life casts. I really noticed I needed to weave incredibly effectively when I was going into Wrathtide Vault. This dungeon really slams. It's the champion capstone dungeon, and it is the hardest healing encounters that I had experienced to date. I also was not well geared for this. I think it was like 160 or 170 or something. I couldn't even do Paragon dungeons after I timed this one, so it was really, really tough. But what I did is you had 2 different boss fights. One of them was the gold boss. He's called Baal Arum, and he has a Shadow Greed Eclipse. And this is where I learned a new thing with Sylvie, that you could stack your Heart Blooms. You can have 2 Heart Blooms active at the exact same time, and they can both be pulsing independently and cranking tons of healing. So what I did was, for the very first AoE, I restored life, Heart Bloomed, restore life again into an Enfeeble and like Iron Bark, just like huge defensives. Had Bluey on myself as well. Having 2 Heart Blooms pumping at the exact same time, crank crazy amount of healing. I even had my Safe Haven down, which further amplified it again. And just blasted tons of healing, because without double Heart Bloom down, the damage is absurdly high. And we just got like pulsed down in a heartbeat and had to like really grind out and progress on the fight. So the second wave, I then used a Heart Bloom, and I needed to make sure I use it earlier. It's actually quite good to be using your Heart Bloom a little earlier than you think you need to. Then I used my Jubilee, my ultimate, to get the Spirit Link Totem kind of effect and even out all the health bars so that Heart Bloom itself was just kind of pulsing as efficiently as you possibly can. You also can life pedal and just hold on to your life pedal before any of that damage happens, which means I was usually nettle bolting, restore lifing very frequently in between the damage events to deal with the regular rot damage of the encounter, so I could hold on to my life pedal for any of the big AoE. And that way I store cooldowns and hold on to cooldowns for big damage moments, and then I spend actually a lot more active time spamming healing spells to deal with the regular rot damage than you ordinarily might, because the burst damage was just so obscenely high. Keep in mind, your Enfeeble can be used on boss fights to reduce the damage that it's dealing to your team, which is incredibly helpful on its own as well. If you end up getting a third Shadow Eclipse, that's when I had both my Heart Blooms back once more, and I was able to just do the same thing I did as the first time, have my Safe Haven down, if I have an Enfeeble, use it again, double Heart Bloom well in advance of the damage, and then just crank out Restore Lives to save everybody as best I possibly could. It's really ridiculous damage. Bringing multiple people with the Sin Stones for damage reduction is also really helpful. When we went to the final boss, this is kind of like on the beachfront property that they have, is First Mate Morrow. His damage check wasn't as bad, but he has these nasty soaks where one player can instantly get dispelled and the other one you just have to keep on healing them, and they take a whole lot less healing. This is a nice area to Flutterfly heal yourself, Bluey yourself, and make sure you're soaking them. And if you feel pretty confident with your HP, you can soak it, dispel the other person, and then you have a bunch more healing on yourself, and you can kind of restore life yourself for the additional healing. That always works, and I did that sometimes. He also has a High Tide for really heavy AoE damage. This is another area. Since the damage is like 10 to 15 seconds long, this is where I would also hold my life pedal, hold a Heart Bloom, and then just be ready to blast that in advance. You do kind of have to move around during this phase because the sharks will come out and try to just munch on you. And if you let them walk through you, they're just sitting on you, munching on you the entire time. So try to dodge those as best as you possibly can, because they deal a pretty moderate amount of damage and it can be kind of annoying. But the heal check was not nearly as bad as we saw out of the Bel Arum, the like liquid gold boss, basically. Still, something else that you have to prepare for. There's also another really big heal check in the Paragon capstone. It's called the Ransack of Drakheim. The first two bosses are not that deadly. We'll have some footage and everything up here of those bosses. They're, pretty steady healing, just heal whoever's taking damage. The final boss is actually a real heal check. And he has this revelation, is basically like he targets somebody, jumps on them, and then he has a group soak. Not that much damage. You usually can prepare your Heart Blooms in advance for this and be able to push up some health bars. Usual restore life, Heart Bloom, restore life again, Prickly Vine, restore life, something like that to keep people healthy. But he also has some beams that are like blaze lines. And these blaze lines, if you played any World of Warcraft, you have arcing lines coming out across your character that can swipe other people and deal a ton of damage. And you have to make sure you deal with those at the same time that your entire group's running across the room to start killing an orb that does not match up with the totems. There's 3 totems around the room. They'll have like a fish, a feather, a moon, an axe, whatever. And you'll have orbs with matching symbols, except for one orb does not belong. If the cast goes off for the orb, it pulses a crazy amount of damage. So this time I pooled up my boom shrooms. I always had them available. Basically what I did the first time I went in here was I restored life, Heart Bloom, restore life, and just went all the way down the frames, just healing everybody as best I could. Weaving, doing the Flutterfly weaving, so I always held my 2 Flutterflies on myself. Waited till they found it for me, and then I just clicked, hit the boom shrooms onto that orb, and I just let that be the damage contribution for me as a healer. There's many different areas where you can hold up your boom shrooms to help with damage. This is certainly one of them. You'll also see it in like Godfall Quarry on the last boss there. A lot of times where you just hold your damage and prio it down into a specific enemy, and that gets incredibly helpful. You also see that in the Adept capstone dungeon, which you guys are probably going to be going into quite a bit. I don't really have a lot of analysis on that for the heal checks because most of them were like damage and like coordination checks rather than just being straightforward heal checks. If you're kind of following the fundamentals here, you should be in pretty good shape to deal with the Adept capstones. It's really the Champion capstone, which was by far the hardest damage that I'd ever had to deal with throughout my progression. So that's all I got for tips right now. I'm sure there's endless different things I could be making topics and videos on, so if you have some preferences, let me know as well. I'm sure I'm going to be doing some on like the high-end adventure bosses and how to deal with the boss fights, because even if, you might see, Paragon or Champion or even Eternal footage coming up soon, there's a lot of the mechanics are staying the same between, Contender or Adept and boss fight healing and what you're going to see in these higher levels. Yeah, they're going to have some more affixes as well, but just learning how to heal the boss fights extremely well as you're going up the ranks as a healer is going to pay you massive dividends going forward into the higher difficulties, because you might know the damage that's happening, but the earlier you prepare for it, the better you deal with it, then the faster everybody gets topped off, and the more you can tolerate a lot of unavoidable damage when people are just standing in goo and standing in garbage and making your life that much more difficult. So, got any other questions or anything else you guys want me to focus on for Sylvie? I will be making some more Vigor content very soon as well, so keep an eye out for that. And big thank you to you guys for checking out our Fellowship content. I know it's not our usual thing, but I really appreciate it. And if you want our UI, check it out in the description. It's also available on Patreon. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.